So good morning. This is Dr. Marilyn Clark, and you are at the lead seat. I have a returning guest today, Nicole Poole-McGill. How you doing today, Nicole?
I'm doing wonderful today.
Great. Thank you again for taking time out to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
And what we're going to talk about today is imposter syndrome.
Yes.
So this is just going to be an open conversation. I want to get
hmm
your thoughts. I have some thoughts too.
hmm
So let's get to it.
Okay.
So my first question, or what I want to talk about, discussion topic is what is imposter syndrome, and why
Mhm.
does it affect so many leaders?
Yeah, and I can give you my quick definition of how I understand it, but I did take a moment to just look up the formal definition,
Okay.
and it was fun kind of breaking it down. But my idea of imposter syndrome is feeling a certain way about something when it comes up and feeling that fear, and that fear stopping you from potentially doing it and feeling like you can't do it, right? Or you questioning yourself, or a lot of self-doubt happens when imposter syndrome seeps in. But I thought it was interesting to go to the definition, and it says the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved. So I thought it was interesting that it's persistent. That means it keeps showing up, right?
Right. I was
It
going to
keeps
ask you
showing
about
up.
that word. I was like, persistent?
Yes, persistent. It keeps showing up because we're not managing it, we're not addressing it, or it's stopping us from doing things that we want to do, or we go into those things with less confidence
Hmm.
and less push to make sure that it works out well, because we've already defeated ourselves,
Right.
right? So that persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has legitimately been achieved, right? So we just throw out all of the things that we've done. And even though sometimes we're asked to be in a space and then we have that imposter syndrome, but we forget why we've been asked to be in that space,
Hmm.
because we've done the work, because we put in the effort, because we made contributions. And I know we're going to talk more and more about this and things that people can do. But one thing is reflection, just reflecting back and saying, okay, they're asking me to be in this space because A, B, C, D. And it's interesting too. I used to work for a career transition organization where people would come to us after they lost their job, and we did self marketing and resumes and all those things. And I would say, so what are your skills and accomplishments? And they would say, I just did my job. It's like,
Hmm.
but you can't get a job saying, I just did my job.
Hmm.
You can't, you have to know how you contributed to it. And that reflection is so important. And we often forget that when imposter syndrome knocks on the door and wants to come in.
You know what? That's strange. I've done career transition work for about 20 years now. And
Yeah.
I've worked with hundreds, of professionals at all levels. I mean, from the CEO all the way down to, the individual contributor,
Mhm.
even a person right out of school. So I get that. I don't like the word persistent. I think
Mhm.
to me it's more like a gut punch. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's a gut punch, but it's just a punch, and you can recover from a punch.
Right. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
I've had the gamut of clients that come to me. Some are devastated, which is,
Mhm.
understandable. And then I
Yeah.
have others, it was like they see it as, an opportunity for reinventing themselves.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
then but just understanding, and then me working with them and showing them the tools and tips and things to
Yeah.
do to land where they want to land. So I
Mhm.
always, when my clients come to me in career transition, I'm always the one that I always try to start out by letting them know that I'm here to help you, move on and get what you want. Because now it's all
Yes.
about you, and I'm going to make sure
Mhm.
that you get to a place where you're going to be, happy, basically,
Mhm.
position that you're
Yes.
going to be happy and why you're going to, So this is your opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
Other thing, um, I get the formal definition,
Mhm.
wonder where that came from, but I was
Yeah.
talking to someone the other day, about
Uh-huh.
imposter syndrome, and they don't believe in it. They don't believe
Oh,
in it at
I've met people like
all.
that too.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
I was like thinking about myself. It's
Mhm,
like, um, I would say in my early career years, I
mhm,
maybe had imposter syndrome would kind of hang around more than it does now.
yeah,
Now it's like a fleeting punch. It's
mhm,
like,
mhm. It
okay,
is.
you
Mhm,
took me by surprise. I got it.
mhm.
You know, I'm
Yeah,
going on down the street.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Been there,
But
done that. Okay.
yeah,
You're gone.
but yeah, in
Yeah.
my early career, you kind of self-check yourself and doubt yourself because it's like,
Mhm,
what did I do wrong? What happened?
mhm,
But I think as you grow in your career, that it's for some people. But I
yeah.
wanted to read what this one person had said to me about
Mhm,
imposter syndrome. She said, "But
okay.
one of the things that I don't like about about this term is around imposter syndrome is it is often rooted in some perceived deficit that we have of ourselves." And
Mhm,
they think a lot of other things are in place other than that, and
mhm.
sometimes it comes from cultural conditioning, is
Oh,
why
yeah.
that imposter syndrome pops up. She looked at
Mhm,
it through a cultural lens. And
mhm.
so that was kind of interesting. What do you think about that? That it can be from a cultural lens?
I think that's so true. And what's so interesting about this, I'm the co-founder of a Black Talent Career Development Program
Mhm.
within the larger organization. And part of the curriculum was conquering imposter syndrome.
Oh.
And one of the sponsors said, I don't believe in imposter syndrome. Same type of thing. Other things, influence the feelings that we have in moving through fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree with that. I think that triggers, I think that past experience, I think that cultural conditions, the way someone has been treated in a previous job, like I've heard a lot about toxic work environments, all those things can contribute to imposter syndrome. So that's why I believe that we put a title on things like that. That's the
Yeah.
title, imposter syndrome. That's how it shows up. But they're very right. There are things that lead up to that or create that space
Mm-hmm.
that people live in when they start to feel imposter syndrome. And that's what it's called. In order to, I think it's good to put titles to things in order to address them and
Right.
know exactly what you're focused on in
Mm-hmm.
order to change it or manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would agree, but I do think it does exist, and all those things that create it
Mm-hmm.
or influence it are in play.
Right. Right. I was watching um Oprah Winfrey was interviewing the girl that created Elementary. I can't call her name. The TV
I
show.
know exactly who you're talking
Okay.
about, but I
And
can't
basically,
recall it
I
either.
can't even call her name, but in the conversation, they were both saying they didn't believe in imposter syndrome. And I
Hmm.
thought to myself, I said, well, she's young. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But I
Hmm.
was like, Oprah, you can't tell me that there hadn't been a moment,
Hmm.
you know what I mean, when it had in your long career, because her career is as long
Yeah.
as mine, only in a
Hmm.
different industry, that one moment didn't go by where that
Hmm.
doubt, just
Yeah.
imposter syndrome doubt, raised its head. I was
Hmm.
like, oh, okay. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm willing to admit it, to
Hmm.
say that I have, like I said, it's like a gut punch to me because it takes me
Hmm.
by surprise. But
Yeah.
then I've gotten to the point as a leader, as a
Hmm.
professional, as a coach, it's like, okay, it's all right. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's all right.
Yeah.
That's not meant for me. God has something better for me. And
Hmm.
it's by the next day or the next hour, I've moved on. So, but that
Yeah.
took growing over time.
Hmm.
Wasn't
Yeah.
something. And so I can see where people maybe starting out on their career where it could
Mhm.
be more prevalent with them than
Yeah.
than
Absolutely.
someone that's, had has tenure in their career. So that being
Absolutely.
said,
Mhm.
um, let's talk about how it manifests itself in leadership.
Mhm.
So how does posture and syndrome uniquely show up for leaders? What are some signs that a leader may be struggling with it?
Oh, yeah. And just to tap into what you said about
Mhm,
Oprah and that
mhm,
interview, when people say they don't believe in imposter syndrome, I challenge them to do what you and I did. Go back to a definition
mhm,
of what it means. Because if we're not on the same page as to what it is,
mhm.
then it's hard to say that it's showing up, right?
Right.
But in terms of leaders and it showing up, I think a lot of that is hesitation, hesitation to do things, potentially questioning themselves. This is all the mental stuff that's going on in their head, and it usually manifests in their physiological state, right? It could be the shaky hands, it could be shaky voice, it could be what if, what if, what if, what if, all the what ifs that start to chip away at their confidence or their perceived ability to do things. And so it comes out in how they communicate. It comes out in how many people they're trying to get on board to either convince them to do it or convince them not to do it.
Mhm.
It shows up differently for everyone. Just like imposter syndrome, I think going back to what you said about cultural conditioning, it goes even deeper than that. What about my childhood? How much was I encouraged to do
Right.
things? What about my work environment where I was outspoken about something I felt passionate about in the meeting and I was shut down
Mhm.
completely? Now I'm that person that never speaks in the meeting before, not me personally, but
Mhm.
someone
Right.
may experience that. And then when they are presented with that opportunity again, it's just like, nope, I'm going to fail. They're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. They're going to tell me to be quiet. That's when it can show up, when you have those past experiences that have put up some walls, right? Or you feel fear. I think that's a huge part of imposter syndrome. It's the fear of the unknown,
Mhm.
so we don't step out into that new thing or step into a role we've been asked to play, because it's like, oh my goodness, what if, oh, and I don't know. And back then I didn't really do it well, or I've never done this before. So, and courage is so important, because that I'm going to summarize the definition of courage is doing something even though you're afraid,
Mhm.
beyond going beyond the fear. Not that it's gone, but you do it anyway.
Right.
Right. And that's, one of the things as we talk about that you can use to go past fear, or excuse me, imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. You talked about some triggers.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
could be from past experiences in your childhood or early careers. Um, when it comes to the role of social comparison with high expectations and fueling imposter syndrome, how does social comparisons kind of fuel imposter syndrome for a person?
I mean, that goes so deep, because we are so, as a society, we're so obsessed with social media and the
Mhm.
things that happen. And I think most of the conversations I've had was around Instagram and the Instagram model or the Instagram person, or making yourself to be what you may not be, or putting on the filter,
Mhm.
or saying something was a tremendous success when it really wasn't. So I think social media is most of it, or some of it, I shouldn't say all, is set up to create an impression and to create a perception. And obviously those impressions influences people's behavior. I mean, that's what we do in advertising. We're influencing people's behavior by
Yes.
putting things up
Right.
to help them make a decision to
Right.
purchase, or
Right.
to lean into a
Purchase the
service,
product.
or whatever the case is.
Right.
So commercials have been social media for
Mhm.
the longest time, but now we're curating it as individuals and putting it up there. But we want people to perceive something in a certain way, and then as someone looking at that, if I have any triggers or think I should be perceived a certain way, and someone is, and that imposter syndrome starts to creep up, and it's knocking on the door, it's waiting to come in your house, your space,
Mhm,
and take up space because you feel like that's the standard. How do I match up
mhm,
against that standard? And if I don't, that my imposter syndrome grows. It takes more space in my life and in my
right,
head,
yes.
and it just impacts, it could truly impact the way people move forward or don't,
Mhm,
because they have imposter syndrome.
mhm. Okay. You know, leaders have to make the decisions, okay?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
so I'm thinking I have a question here, but it's um, I'm kind of wondering if this makes sense. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Let's talk about this. How does imposter syndrome affect a leader's ability to make confident decisions? I kind of feel that a leader may have imposter syndrome may come up in a certain situation,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but I also would look to a leader in their development to be able to recognize that and want to kind of reflect and analyze that whatever the situation might have been, and then be able to work through coaching of becoming more confident with the decisions.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
you know, you know, what do you think about that when it comes to their
Hmm.
ability to make confident decisions? How
I
does
think,
imposter syndrome affect it?
yeah, that's the key. The key word is confidence, right? And
Mhm,
making a
mhm.
confident decision, because it's higher stakes, I think, when you're in a leadership position. Because if you're in a leadership position, people see you as a leader. So they're going to follow you, and they're going to automatically assume that you're confident in your
Mhm,
decisions.
mhm,
But if you know that's a gap or a development area for you, I agree with you, is recognizing, even if they can't name it as a confident thing through coaching, it's like, okay, how do you show up when you have to make a decision?
mhm.
How does that show up on you physically, emotionally?
Right,
What happens to your body?
right.
And for them to answer and give those, okay, that kind of adds up to you not feeling confident of
Mhm,
it. So what are some things you can do that will allow you to go into this decision and be more confident in making it? And at that point, them, discovering ways they've done it in the past, the way they do
mhm,
it right now, tweaking things they do right now to improve their decision making process is important, so that imposter syndrome won't move in and take over. It's really managing that energy, right? A lot of times when I work with individuals for presentation skills, they suffer from anxiety. I mean,
yes.
it's sometimes extreme. Like, if one of the top fears in the world is public speaking.
Public speaking, right.
Right. So we've worked through some techniques. It's like, and I tell them it's not really about you getting rid of the anxiety. It's changing that energy into something else.
Right, right.
And I think that that's true for imposter syndrome too. It's a big energy and it can be powerful, but we fuel that power,
Mhm,
right? And if we start to take away some of that power by
mhm,
being more reflective on our achievements and our contributions,
mhm,
getting clarity where we can, like you said, if they go into it and analyze and assess before even making the decision, they can be more confident in
mhm.
the decision that they make. So I think it's a great question in the sense that it does address how they come into or manage imposter syndrome, and then how they dissect the things that they need to do and apply it to how they can get things done.
Right. I that another, I think something else that pops up when it comes to imposter syndrome is micromanaging. And I
Mm,
remember I have a friend, and years
mhm,
ago, she worked under a manager that was a micromanager.
mhm,
That was his style, and she just could not breathe. It was like,
Mm,
she just could not breathe. It's like
yeah.
she knew what I was doing, and I think he knew what she knew what to, she knew her job.
Hmm.
She was new
Yeah.
to this job. She knew how to do it. It was in human resources. But he just would not let her breathe. It was like fact checking everything that she did, to the point where she decided, I got to move on because I can't work
Yeah.
with this manager because he's micromanaging me.
Hmm.
And not so much, she felt it was stifling her growth and she wasn't going to be able to grow. And someone that's second guessing me all the time, I just can't work with that person.
Right.
So what
Right.
was interesting, years later, I ran into another woman, and she told me she had been interviewing with this same manager, and she was excited about taking the job. And I kind of explained to her, and we talked about, I know his management style. And I
Hmm.
know that this would be a step up for you as far as your career is concerned, but in making your decision, I know from experience, not that I worked with him, but others that have,
Hmm.
that this is the style of management that you would be under. And if you're gonna have to decide, you're gonna be comfortable with that. And so her decision was that yes, she was going to be comfortable. Yes, she was offered the job. And
Okay.
yes, she did find out that here again, the management style of this leader was, for their confidence, was to micromanage everything. And
Yeah.
then, it wasn't like I told you so, but she then understood where I was coming from, and understanding when you go to a job or you're deciding to go with a job, that's kind of important,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
to know how
Yeah.
your manager manages things, and
Yes.
asking those hard questions in the
Hmm.
interview process so that you can assess whether this is going to work for you or not. So
Hmm.
some people
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
When it comes to micromanagement and leadership and
Hmm.
making decisions, what what ways do you think, Nicole, would be to pull someone that's a micromanager, give them more confidence about being overly cautious? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. You know what comes to mind is like the other side of imposter syndrome. Like one
Mhm,
side will keep us from doing something, another side of it will make us over index,
mhm,
right? And that's if I have more control over it, then I can't fail. If I have more control over it, then there's no fear. If I can have, and I'm talking about the manager who's the micromanager. If
mhm.
I can have control over it, then there's no fear, there's no failure
Right.
in this. So the manager himself could be suffering from imposter syndrome or experiencing imposter syndrome because they need to have that control over everything. They need to influence the outcome to the point where it's going to turn out exactly the way they want or very close to it. And when it doesn't, that's when, I don't want to say wrath, but that's when it's like, oh, you're not doing it right. You need to do it like this because it
Right.
needs to control. But to answer your question, someone dealing with someone else who's a micromanager, it's tricky, right? It's really tricky in the sense that if I work for you, how can I ask you and show you that I can do my job. First, not ask you if you can let me do my job and show
Yeah,
you
let me do it.
that
Right.
I can do my job. So it's interesting in that you said about the interviewing process. I don't know how honest people would say, like, I'm a micromanager. Do you
Uh-huh.
like that? It usually comes out. I like to stay very close to things. That's the code,
Mhm.
everyone. Yeah, I
Right.
like to stay very close
Close to
to
things.
everything. That
Mhm.
means most likely
See?
they're going to be a micromanager. But when you're in that space, the tricky part and the risk is sharing, hey, I know how I've been doing this for a long time. I trust you as my manager, and I need you to trust me as
Mhm,
the person who is doing this job. So, how can I make you more comfortable with
mhm,
me doing this job without you micromanaging me? And that may be a compromise of, okay, I'll give you the status update every Friday, and having different checkpoints depending on the project. and all those things, but trying to come to an agreement, being open, sharing that feedback with the manager and trying to come to an agreement. Like, this is how I work, this is how I thrive,
Mm-hmm.
and this is how I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and being very honest and hoping that the manager is open enough to first recognize that there are micromanaging, and second, open enough to shift their behavior in order for this person to do their job well.
Right.
But I
That's
think it's just so interesting that it's the flip side of
right.
imposter syndrome,
Right.
hitting the gas
Right.
going forward. So I can eliminate the fear of failure, but I might be plowing down people in the process
In the
of
process.
hitting the gas.
What you just said was very important. So that kind of leads or segues into the next thing I want to talk about, and it's the importance, and you said the importance of the leader being open to discussing
Mhm,
imposter
mhm,
syndrome, and how could they go also about creating a safe environment for these
mhm,
discussions that's going to benefit their team and also the
mhm.
organization.
I think, and it's a lot of talk these days about compassionate leader and vulnerability. Brene Brown talks a lot about being vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
around things. And I think, when we think about leadership overall and those traits that a lot of people think are part of leadership, a lot of times we don't talk about compassion. A lot of times we don't talk about vulnerability, and for a leader to come into a space and encourage that, I think they first have to be vulnerable. They have to say, these are at a time in my career, or even now, this is what I experience sometimes. And it feels like imposter syndrome. And sometimes I have fear of the failure, but I persist anyway because I want to and have to make different things happen. So I want to open that space up for, the people who I'm responsible for,
Mm-hmm.
to say you can do that too, and it could be one-on-one. This could be a team effort. We could create a space for ourselves to come and say, this is what happened, this is how I feel. I would love the support of the people around me, and that's ideal, right?
Right.
Not everybody have environments where they can say, "Oh, I want to be vulnerable today
Right.
to my manager. I want to be vulnerable today with my teams." And sometimes, that environment will never be that. So, what are the other sources you can connect into, like a mentor, like a colleague, like in your personal life, to say, okay, this is what I need for
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, when they're on that team and it's not happening within the space that they work in.
You know what? I totally, for me, understand
Hmm.
about when you say vulnerability and having passion as a leader.
Yeah.
Okay. Those would be qualities that, I would embrace.
Hmm.
But a lot of times, and I'm not going to say all women, but a lot of times we as women think that if in doing that, it shows a sign of weakness
Hmm.
and in a leadership role.
Yeah.
And so then what happens, what I've seen happen with with some, people that I have worked with women that I have worked with, they feel I can't show that weakness because
Hmm.
if if I show weakness, I should say that if
Hmm.
I show weakness, then I'm not going to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be I'm not going to be able to have influence or to get things done.
Hmm.
So they kind of teeter, and so what happens is they come back when they hear things, it's like the demeanor of the way people will see them is something that they're like, well, I was just making sure I was getting it done. I was, I never thought that people thought this way, about me, or I never, no one ever said anything to me because you showing that vulnerability or that weakness, that it was
Yeah.
like, I can't be weak. So it's kind of a fine line in
It is.
determining how you're going to lead what that's going to
Mhm.
look like. So what do you think about the fact that there are leaders, and I'll say men and women both, that
Mhm.
feel that a sign of weakness
Mhm.
is not something that is a trait that a leader should have.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we talked about authentic leadership,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm,
and then coming to this conversation. And I know it depends on where you are in your career and all this stuff, but it to me, when I think about earlier in my career, I'm like, okay, I know the standard of leadership and management and doing good at my work, so I'm going to go for
mhm.
that standard. I know that I could be perceived a certain way because of who I am and how I show up, so I'm still going to be who I am as much as I can within the realm of what's required.
Right. Okay.
And what I learned from that is bull crap. And when I say that, because at some point you're like exhausted, right?
Okay.
How do I'm not being me in this space, and how do I be me but still be effective? And the have people actually recognize the paradox that I could be assertive and be vulnerable.
Mhm,
I can be vulnerable and get the job done and make a confident decision.
mhm.
I can be compassionate as a human and know that you are suffering through something. If you share that with me, know that I've suffered through something before, and still tell you or give you feedback that is developmental and things that you need to change. And I think that the conversation being had is so important, in different outlets, with leadership, at conferences, at summits, within organizations, saying that you can be both. And it's almost these days, especially with the generational changes, you have
Right.
to be both.
Okay.
You do. Coming hard nosed as a leader is not going to attract a Gen Z person.
Okay.
Being compassionate and showing some vulnerability can, connect with millennials and Gen Z.
Mhm,
So it's so important for people to know that they don't have to conform to this box of requirements, that they can bring that authenticity in,
mhm,
and whether it's a woman or a man, and demonstrate. They'll have to demonstrate. They can't just talk it, and demonstrate that both are possible and both are effective when it comes to being a leader of others, of humans.
mhm. Okay. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of, I can see where the generational part comes in.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the history of corporations over the years and the leadership styles, if you go back to the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and it was like, you just sucked it up and took it, click your heels
Yeah.
and salute, I'll stick it out, because I have to have a
Mm-hmm.
job, to feed my family.
Mm-hmm.
But this, these generations now in this new century, it's like they are really looking, not they're looking to work, but they're also looking to grow. And they're
Yeah.
looking for someone that's going to not only just give them a paycheck, but they want to be able to enjoy what they do. And they also want to be able to grow within that job. They also want to be able to feel valued in that job. Whereas it
Yeah. Make an
was like,
impact.
if
Mm-hmm.
you got a manager and that manager, you had two choices. You either took it or you left.